Good morning, everyone. Folks could find a place to sit if you haven't done so already. My name's Carrie Kimball, and I'm the Executive Director of Montana Environmental Information Center. I co-direct with my esteemed colleague, Ann Hedges. And just wanted to offer you all a hearty welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We're really lucky to have you. And I'll mention that we're on the homelands of the Salish Kootenai and Blackfeet Nation, and I mention that both to honor their relationship to this place and to also honor the deep history of leadership and stewardship that we have. And as we all know, we're here to celebrate other leaders and stewards of this place who we're really grateful to. Our 1972 Constitutional Convention delegates. And I'll ask if you are a delegate to stand up or raise your hand, whatever works best for you. Wonderful. Thank you, both for your leadership then and now, and for joining us today. We're just so honored to have you. And yes, so on behalf of MEIC's board, staff, and members, welcome. And I'll turn the microphone over to former Governor Brian Schweitzer.
Well, we are here to celebrate 50 years of our Constitution. Maybe at the time it was the most progressive in America. And we're not just celebrating the Constitution, we're celebrating the men and women who created that Constitution that we've all lived under for the last 50 years. Now, I was just a junior in high school when you delivered a Constitution to me for the rest of my life. But let's back up. Let's talk about the Constitution that you replaced. That was a Constitution that was effectively written by a Copper King, a group of Copper Kings. And it was written by 75 individuals. We all know that they were all men, because, of course, women didn't even have the right to vote. And I've asked the question, how many Native people were involved in writing that Constitution? How many Montanans were involved in writing that Constitution? That Constitution was written by the Copper Kings, for the Copper Kings. And your Constitution, our Constitution, it recognized a few things. To start with, it recognized that all the people ought to be involved in our government. And while I believe there were only 2 women in the legislature at that time, we had something like 28 women out of the 100 delegates who were women, which today, that doesn't sound that great. But at its time, it was very progressive, and it represented Montana. At that time, we had a Constitution that didn't respect privacy of the individual. In fact, it didn't. We'll go through a whole list of things about the individual it didn't respect. It didn't respect your privacy, and it didn't respect your right to know. That's kind of interesting. Before you wrote that Constitution in 1972, we had a Constitution that allowed the legislature to meet. And let's just start with how the legislature was selected in those days. Every county had a certain number of members of the legislature based on their population. So we can think back then it would have been Silver Bow, probably was the biggest, and whatever number of legislators we had, it would have been dominated by Silver Bow County. Well, each individual didn't vote for a member. Today, of course, you live in a district, and when you look at your ballot, there's one person that you vote that you probably know personally. That's the way it works in Montana. You go to church with them, or their kids were in school, or kids were in 4-H together. You know that individual, you know something about that person, you know something about the challenger. On that basis, you can make a decision. But in those days, since the Copper Kings owned the newspapers, they wanted to make sure that you did what they wanted you to do. So in Silverbow, it was just you voting on some 20 members of the legislature. 20 members, all 20, versus 20 people who ran against them. And of course, the Copper Kings owned the newspapers. And of course, the newspapers today are perhaps, for the most part, fairer. But there's actually more than just the question of privacy and the question of your ability to be represented. When the legislature met, there was no requirement that there was some third party present in the room when they were making their decisions. Today, there has to be, and there's some people who have been members of the legislature, if there's a certain number of members of the legislature meeting in a room, it must be open to the public, right? It must be open to the press. Well, I noticed in the last legislative session, they came up with some novel ways. Whatever that number was, they would rotate people in and out to make sure they stayed one under so they didn't have to allow the press. But they had to play some games to get there. And furthermore, you had no record of how people voted. Before the Constitution that you were involved in, people could vote in committee for and against bills. Bills could pass 7-3, 12-2, 13-1, and you never knew. And there was no record kept until the last vote. And if you've ever been involved in the legislature, you know that there can be a lot of games played along the way. And of course, the most important game that was played along the way, every single one of those meetings, there was somebody present. And that was one of the Copper King's henchmen. And we knew for sure what the result was going to be. And we knew that the citizens of Montana would always be on the outside looking in. The Copper Kings, of course, they only had one interest in Montana: come, rape, and run. Take the wealth. Whatever damage they did to the environment or the people who lived here and worked here was not their concern, as you know. Well, you held them to account by telling every individual in Montana, as a resident of Montana, you have a right to a healthful environment. No Copper King, no wealthy individual, no corporation can take that right away from you. And I don't know where the rest of the states are today during the last 50 years, but I know that when you wrote those words, you were the first. So we are here to honor not just those of you who are here today, but all of your colleagues that were with you on those important days. And as you know, there will be, during the next year, there will be momentous occasions where we talk about when the election day was, when we talk about when you first met, when we talk about when the governor signed it, when we talk about when it went before the Supreme Court, because it was challenged by the powerful interests. The powerful interests in Montana said, we don't give a damn that we had the people of Montana vote for it. We don't care that we elected 100 members of the citizenry. And by the way, were any of you members of the legislature when you ran for the Con-Con? No? You weren't members of the legislature? Oh, they wouldn't allow you, because even the Copper Kings recognized there needed to be a division between the legislative branch and this branch. They even recognized that. Even the Copper Kings. Well, I read the newspapers, and I know that the current legislature doesn't recognize that. So we are protected by the words that you have written. And I thank you for that. And all of Montana thanks you for that. And I believe that we are a better state because you were willing to sacrifice that time away from your families And it was pretty contentious. You didn't all agree. They weren't all Democrats, and they weren't all Republicans. And there were some very powerful interests who were saying to you, no, nope, not today. But you were the kind of citizens that said, yes, yes we can, and yes we will today, and we will stand together as individuals for a better state. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Schweitzer. For those that don't know me, my name is Roger Sullivan, and it has been my honor through a number of years to serve on the board of the hosting organization today, the Montana Environmental Information Center. And it is indeed a great honor for me to join in honoring you, the 1972 CONCON delegates. In many ways, Montana remains a small town with a long main street, and we meet at fortuitous intersections. As a young carpenter with an interest in Montana's environment, who was living in northwest Montana in the 1970s and early 1980s, attending law school seemed for me but a remote possibility. But that changed when I traveled down to Missoula and met with Marge Brown, then the assistant dean of our law school. Our hour-long visit changed my life. As you know, Marge was appointed by through the 1969 legislature's Constitutional Revision Commission proceedings. She was appointed to the commission along with, among others, eventual CONCON delegates Wade DeHood and Richard Roeder. And Wade, I hope that you're able to be Zooming in today. I talked to his son as recently as this week, and Wade still gets into his office, and I'm hopeful that you're out there Zooming in. Marge not only encouraged me and helped arrange financial assistance, she inspired me. Having grown up in Libby, Marge was steeped in the beauty of our state, aware of the impacts of our extractive industries, and mindful of the unreconciled legacy of Montana's native peoples. At the law school, Marge was instrumental in encouraging a generation of Montana's attorneys interested in environmental and natural resources law, as well as Indian law. And all of this intersected with the still young 1972 Montana Constitution, because it was with the support of Marge and Professor Larry Ellison and my classmate, CONCON delegate Gene Bowman, that we successfully petitioned the law school for the first class devoted to the 1972 Montana Constitution. Since the state law library was desperately trying to get rid of their excess-bound transcripts of the Constitutional Convention, Gene arranged for each of us in our inaugural class to purchase a complete set of the transcripts for the then steep price of $25. What I read astonished me. The depth and thoughtfulness of your discussions and debates, your civility and your humor, your dedication to making Montana a better place for this and future generations has remained a beacon for practitioners and judges over the ensuing 50 years, as we have attempted to forge a jurisprudence that befits the rights and responsibilities which you bequeathed to all Montanans. After its narrow passage by a plurality of votes in 1972, the document seemingly lay dormant over its first 25 years, only occasionally construed by the courts And even then, its far-reaching rights and responsibilities were largely ignored by our judges trained in another era. There were exceptions, as then Chief Justice Frank Haswell, who before the construction of our new beautiful Montana Supreme Court building sat here in this chamber, and he recognized in early cases brought immediately following it that the Constitution brought in new rights and responsibilities, and specifically in the realm of the environment. And he warned in his dissenting opinion that unless we listened to your construction of that important document and reviewed the transcripts of that proceeding, that we would not be able to effectuate the purposes and objectives of our new Constitution. But mostly, this was a period of calm before the storm of constitutional adjudication that has taken place over the last 25 years, which has left hardly even a subsection of our Constitution untested by Montana's courts. The recent process hasn't been a simple ascending trajectory. A zigzag, up and down, would be a better image. And yet this sustained and vital effort has indeed forged a Montana jurisprudence largely reflecting the intent in our Constitution's text and the transcripts of your proceedings, which have often been cited by the deciding courts. And acknowledging that I'm leaving out important participants in this process, I will name but one individual today, and that is your very own Wade DeHood, chair of the so-called Bill of Rights Committee, who brought to the task of enumerating our fundamental rights his knowledge of the injuries wrought under the 1889 Constitution and implementing decisions by the Montana Supreme Court, which too often sacrificed individual rights at the altars of sovereign and corporate immunity. Wade's impressive voice still rings through the pages of the transcripts of proceedings and is quoted in decisions of the Montana Supreme Court in which Wade has participated on a number of occasions as a friend of the court in defense of the 1972 Constitution's fundamental rights. And I would note also that the others of you are also equally at times quoted in these proceedings. So your participation years ago and your dedication to improving Montana and indeed making this a better place for this and future generations is still often cited in court decisions. But beyond individual practitioners who have worked to implement the vision and promises of Montana's 1972 Constitution, have been several Montana non-governmental organizations who have been the avatars of important provisions in our Constitution. These include the Montana Trial Lawyers Association, of which Wade was a founding director, the Montana ACLU, and the Montana Environmental Information Center, which has brought us together today, and which was founded in 1973 to advance implementation of Montana's new Constitution. The efforts of these practitioners and organizations are too numerous to recite today, but even a sampling of decisions that have been wrought through by our courts through their efforts, I think is worthy of remembering. I think one of the most important was the 1999 decision of the Montana Supreme Court in the Montana Environmental Information Center versus Montana Department of Environmental Quality case, which, in construing what the right to a clean and healthful environment meant in Article 2, Section 3, and in Article 9, they turned to the transcripts of your proceedings. And the court's review of that was what led them to really a profoundly important decision And the conclusion, and this is reading from that decision, we conclude, based on the eloquent record of the Montana Constitutional Convention, the record of your proceedings, that to give effect to the rights guaranteed in Article 2, Section 3, and Article 2, Section 1 of the Montana Constitution, they must be read together in consideration given to all the provisions of Article 9, as well as the preamble to the Montana Constitution. In doing so, we conclude that the delegates' intention was to provide language and protections which are both anticipatory and preventative. The delegates did not intend to merely prohibit that degree of environmental degradation which can be conclusively linked to ill health or physical endangerment. Our Constitution does not require that dead fish float on the surface of our state's rivers and streams before its far-sighted environmental protections can be invoked. And for that, we remain forever grateful and thankful to you. But I end with a cautionary note in today's political and civic climate, and I do so by referring to the end of the Constitution which you bequeathed to us, Article 14, Section 1. The legislature, by an affirmative vote of 2/3 of all the members, whether one or more bodies, may at any time submit to the qualified electors the question of whether there shall be an unlimited convention to revise, alter, or amend this Constitution. Perhaps this is but a contemporary reminder that, as Thomas Jefferson instructed, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And so it is my hope that this generations of Montana will turn to as a North Star, not only the entire text, but the preamble to the Constitution that you bequeathed to us, and that they too will share in and give voice to this collective prayer with which you began the 1972 Constitution, and which some of you here today were actually the authors of as it worked its way through committee. We, the people of Montana, grateful to God for the quiet beauty of our state, the grandeur of our mountains, the vastness of our rolling plains, and desiring to improve the quality of life, equality of opportunity, and to secure the blessings of liberty for this and future generations, do ordain and establish this Constitution. On behalf of all those laboring in the trenches over this ensuing 50 years after you bequeathed to us the gift of the 1972 Constitution, I raise my voice in joining all of them in thanking you. And I'd like now to introduce Ann Hedges, MEIC's Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs. Ann?
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Governor Schweitzer. I can't add anything more eloquent than what you just heard. I just want to say a couple words, though, because for nearly 30 years I've been working at MEIC and relying on the words that you all put to paper. And I want to thank each and every one of you for the gift that you've given us, that you've given current people in this state and for future generations. I anticipate this Constitution will withstand the test of time, and it will be with us for my grandchildren. But people hear about the right to a clean and healthful environment in the environmental context so many times, and I want to thank you for that. It is so visionary. Bob Campbell, thank you. We also, I think more than any other provisions in the Constitution, rely on open government provisions. We can't do our job and hold government accountable and try to make sure that our air is clean and our water is clean without the ability to know what government is up to. And because of our right to know and our right to participate provisions in the Constitution, not just MEIC, but every citizen or person in this state is entitled to see what government is up to scrutinize it, to ask questions. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into agencies and said I wanted to see a document, and they tried to hide it from me. And I would say, I'm going to have my attorney call your attorney, and I'll be back in half an hour. And that happened. It happened many times, and it works because of your Constitution. You gave us that right. And I can't thank you enough. We are absolutely tardy in giving you this honor. MEIC every year has an award ceremony. We have people on this award who have, since 1978, have been furthering the well-being of all Montanans. And it's everybody from Lee Metcalf and A.B. Guthrie and Pat Williams to folks that you've probably never even heard of, the quiet people who are out there every day fighting for a better world in which all of us can benefit. So I want to thank everybody who's preceded you, but also thank you, and we apologize for this taking so long to honor you and your great accomplishments. So with that, I would like to first call up Mainan Ellingson if you have a couple things that you would like to say, and then I'd like to give all of you an opportunity to say a few words if you are interested, but just know we are forever grateful, as are our children and our children's children. Thank you.
Thank you, MEIC, for honoring us. Thank you, Governor Schweitzer. I want to accept this honor on behalf of many delegates who are no longer with us, particularly the indefatigable chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, who fought so hard and so long for this right, Ms. Louise Cross of Glendive, Montana. I also want to thank the efforts of and recognize Don Foster of Lewiston, who was with us on every one of these debates and motions to reconsider, and Daphne Bugby of Missoula, for whom this article was very near and dear, and Dorothy Eck of Bozeman, as well as every one of you sitting here in this front row. There are only 13 of us delegates left out of the 100, and 7 of us are here, right? So that's pretty good. Is my math right? No, 6 of us. That's still pretty good out of 13. The right to a clean and healthful environment was perhaps the hardest fought of all of the provisions of the Constitution. It took hours and hours of debate, rethinking, restructuring, actually some political maneuvering, until we finally got to the proper vote on Bob Campbell's last motion. But I want to say that those words in the Constitution, not only the right to a clean and healthful environment, but every other one of these provisions, they're only words. They are only words on paper. And it takes a concerted effort to make these rights real. It takes a governor who seriously takes the oath of office to uphold the Constitution. It takes a governor who is willing to appoint quality people to agencies such as the DEQ and the Department of Natural Resources, who have the responsibility for implementing these constitutional provisions. It takes legislators who started in 1973 implementing this Constitution and continuing to do that. And it takes citizens who are willing to go to court. And it takes organizations like the MEIC and the ACLU who are willing to bring these provisions to life, to make sure they don't fade away, and to make sure that they are properly guaranteed. More than anything, and we are faced with this now, more than anything, it takes a nonpartisan Supreme Court. Because in the final analysis, it's the Supreme Court that interprets what those words mean. And they are, of course, guided by our transcript, but a nonpartisan, impartial Supreme Court is the final arbiter between the protection of this Constitution until the voters decide to have another constitutional convention. So I thank you, MEIC, for bringing the very first case that really furthered this right to a clean and healthful environment.
It's so great to be here. I'm Arlene Reichert, one of the delegates, probably the oldest one living, but in any case, it is just such a great honor to be here, and it's so nostalgic for us. You know, I can just close my eyes and picture the 100 delegates when we first gathered. I wish they were all here today, but I'm glad to see some of my fellow delegates here, and it's just such a glorious thing to have been part of the Montana Constitutional Convention of 1972. And what Roger Sullivan said about people like Marge Brown. Marge was one of my mentors. I was active in the League of Women Voters long before the Constitutional Convention. It had tremendous influence. So when this opportunity arose, and especially because the Supreme Court in its wisdom said there'd be no legislators, and I failed in my one attempt to be a legislator. Thank goodness I failed. My son said, I hated losing at the time, but he says, losing builds character. And not only does it build character, it gave me an opportunity to serve as a Constitutional Convention delegate, which has been one of the highlights of my long life. And I want to thank the Montana Environmental Information Center for so many things. This honor today is great. Thank you very much. But also for implementing so many provisions of the Constitution. I hate to think what would have happened if we hadn't had an Environmental Information Center. Many of those wonderful provisions would have just been stagnant. But I'm so pleased. Thank you very much. And I just want to say that being part of this convention was so thrilling. And I remember during our orientation, one of the most important things that happened was we decided to sit alphabetically. There goes partisan politics. I know my seatmate was Mainan. She was one of the youngest delegates. And so many of us, came from various backgrounds, didn't agree much on anything. But in the final analysis, all 100 of us worked together, and what we did is forget about party politics and concentrated on issues. And that was the difference of really being able to write that Constitution. It gives me great pride to have just been a part of it. And from that first orientation session to the very last experience we had when we had to sign the Constitution, there were 100 of us, and none of us was completely happy with the document. Some of them were not happy at all with it, but we were worried that not all 100 delegates would sign. But unbelievably, when the day came to sign the Constitution, all 100 of the delegates signed the proposed document. And so in retrospect, that was great. Can you think of that happening today? You know, it's just amazing what was accomplished. And so I think that we set a perfect example. It exemplified how people can get along without getting bogged down with these partisan politics. I just hope that in the future we go back to that sort of philosophy. I want to thank you all again for this great honor, and I'm just so pleased to still be alive for this. I hope I make it to the 50th reunion. It's going to be in June 2022. I'll be 96 and a half then. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting us here today, and so proud to be a part of this event. A couple of things that come to mind. I really am struck by the fact that today the delegates that we have here were the youngest delegates of the convention, obviously. And I think in a way that is a harbinger of hope for us. Because it was these delegates, especially, who drafted the environmental article. And so, you know, I heard Bill Gates recently talk about the difficulties that we're going through, the tremendous divide in this country over political stuff. And it seemed to me that well, what Bill Gates said was, you know, if you think that the problems we've got with political division today are kind of insurmountable, they are nothing compared to the environmental impact of climate change, which is coming. And, you know, that's a very sobering thing, and yet we've got a lot of people who don't believe that there is an environmental impact involved. But I think that the fact that what we have in the Constitution were these young upstarts who saw, you know, who looked down the road and realized that, you know, we weren't writing a Constitution just for that day, that hopefully there's a generation coming that understands that there's a climate issue coming that had better be dealt with. And so I just think that amid some of the pessimism that is around today, that it's important to remember that it was young delegates who did this, and hopefully there's a younger generation coming that will understand the importance of climate change and its impact, and we'll deal with that. So, again, thank you so much for inviting us to come.
My name's Jerry Lindorf, and I didn't prepare anything to say today, but I do want to thank the Environmental Information Center for the kindness you've showed us. And I thank you, Ann, and your organization. Very much appreciate being here. I would like to say a couple things just based on the remarks I've heard. First, on Ann's emphasis on the importance of open government. at the time, I don't think I realized it, but today, I think I understand that that might be the most important provision we placed in our Constitution. At least it's among them. And the reasons are, the constitutions, both the federal and the state constitution begin, "We the people," as if we the people are the boss we're supposed to be, and the people we elect are our servants, our public servants. If we don't know what they're doing for us, how can we evaluate the job they're doing? And that is essential. And unfortunately, at the federal level, they abuse that terribly. The Freedom of Information Act is something Congress passed, but it seems like they honor it in the breach. There are tons of Freedom of Information Act lawsuits going on in the United States against the federal government, various agencies of it all the time. They just won't give out the information. They delay it. And by the time people get it, it's not timely anymore. At the state level, I think we've done much better. Governor Schweitzer pointed out the problems that we used to have. I was old enough when he was still in school to have observed some of them. And I'll just give you one example. You could have a bill and request a legislator to introduce it for you. It would be heard in committee without a schedule. You had to be up here all the time if you wanted to know. And you had to sit through the session, because at the end of the session, the speaker would call for announcements if it was in the House, or the president if it was in the Senate. And the various committee chairman would get up and say, the Committee on Agriculture will meet in room 232 on adjournment. If you weren't there, you didn't know that the meeting happened. If you were aware of the meeting and went to it, you could testify, but you weren't allowed to stay for the committee discussion or the vote. So you never knew what was said at the committee or how anybody voted. If they voted to kill your bill, it came to the floor, and it came under order of business. I don't recall the number. That's been over 50 years ago now. But the speaker would say, order of business number such and such, committee reports. And the various chairmen would start to stand up. And the chairman of Agriculture, when he stood up, would say, we, the Committee on Agriculture, having had under consideration House Bill 521, recommend the same do not pass. I move adoption of the committee report, Mr. Speaker. The speaker would ask for the ayes and the nays. No voting on the board, which they did have, but there'd be a few inaudible ayes and nays, and your bill could end up killed, and you didn't know how one legislator voted on it. Since the adoption of the Constitution, that's all changed, and most of you didn't see how it was prior to that new Constitution. And things, I think, go pretty well at the legislature compared to how they used to be. Committee meetings are scheduled in advance. You know when to be there. The votes are all public. The proceedings are all public. And a meeting, I think, is defined now as if a quorum is present. And that's what Governor Schweitzer was talking about, was not keeping a quorum present. You could have, in effect, a meeting without calling one. And even at the local government level, they were reluctant to accept the county commissioners of various counties, city commissions, didn't like the fact that they had to have public meetings. I think that's all changed a lot now, but you've seen things like in the Committee of Helena, the commission would have a work session. They would really take care of all the business, and then go have the meeting and just, reenact what was already agreed upon with little discussion. But as I say, I think everything has worked out for the better, but the important thing there is for we the people, we need to keep an eye on our government and make sure that they continue to be open. And hopefully the federal government might follow the good example of our state. One other article or provision in the Constitution that most of you have mentioned is the provisions that deal with the clean and healthful environment. Article 2 provides a right to a clean and healthy environment. Article 9 gives us all a duty to, I believe the words are, maintain and improve a clean and healthful environment. For me, that was an easy vote. And I think in the end, it was an easy vote for most people in the convention. I mean, who's against a clean and healthful environment? The difficulties come for the legislature and the courts. They're really the ones making the decisions on what constitutes a clean and healthful environment and what can require people to do to maintain it or even improve it. And I think as we see nonprofit corporations, I assume you're a nonprofit corporation, engage more and more on the public stage. They're the ones that are out there in front, and they're able to pool resources of a lot of people, bring them behind an issue, and make a meaningful presentation where us as individuals alone, hardly know what's going on. So I would thank MEIC for their courage and for undertaking the burden they have, get down in the pit, fight the battle, and help us maintain a good, clean, and healthful environment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ms. Hedges. I'm Lyle Monroe. I was campaigned in Cascade County, and it was at that time for that election, the District 13. So some of you had found something on your chair, and so I had these printed up because it is meaningful. We need to preserve and protect the beautiful thing that we have called our Constitution. It was an unbelievable process to be elected and a real honor to serve, and just a mind-blowing experience of going through. You had to have a lot of discipline to sit in your chair and listen to the debate and push the button the right yes or no. And but we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of laughs, and some of the people you mentioned, Arlene, and others, were really profound in their elocution and how they fought and how they persuaded and how they helped people. Jean Bowman, for Pete's sake, she watched every one of us. We would come to her desk and she would watch us sign the Constitution, which all of us did, so we all supported it. But to see the democratic process and the legislative process happen was just, well, there's films of it. There are people that took some films of it, but some of them it wasn't very good in its clarity, and it wasn't real clear. So some of that film way back when still exists. Malcolm Holtz was a legislator during our time, but his son bought Tom Judge's advertising agency, and I think he had that for a while. So where Malcolm Holtz's lives, he might be in Helena, he might be back in Great Falls where they lived, but there is some, and maybe we can find some of that, and we can see people on the floor with the microphone and going through these debates. So there's a lot of heroes were on that floor, and a lot of meetings. We did caucusing. We met on what the wording should be, and our Graybill was a great leader, as you know, our president, and he helped move things along and really cracked the whip. We had a lot of work to do. Was it 54 days? 54 days? In 54 days, we produced a document that really changed this. And when Brian came to our 95 Society meeting, he waved that Constitution. He says, "This helped me do my job." It told me what every division of government was responsible for. Forrest Anderson got the reorganization of our 20, you still had 20 different divisions of government. So it was a lot easier to handle. So his getting that through really helped after we passed the Constitution to get some things implemented. So I thank you for honoring us, and I hope that all of you, I hope the Constitution is digitized so every Montanan, there are journals, yes, but so every computer-wise can get into every part of that journal and hear that verbiage and really like it. So thanks again, and I think we do have a good future. I think if we, all of us, not just the younger folks, everybody, but your organization is really instrumental in protecting and defending this nice document. Thank you.
Wanted to create a little excitement there. See if you guys would really see that I could stand up and talk to you today. But I've been looking forward to this date for a long, long time. It was amazing back then. You've read all the stories. The MEIC started in 1973, just as soon as this went into effect. And we had as the most contentious article whether or not we should say in the Montana Constitution that there should be a right to a clean and healthful environment, or if we should say, as the corporations urged us to do, that Montana would definitely have an environment. But it would not describe whether it be a good environment, a bad environment, North Dakota or Louisiana environment. So the corporations fortunately lost, but it was a lot of close votes on this, and it was over the years that a lot of people, especially MEIC, has kept the dream alive, and with the Constitution, with our natural resources article, has really shown the way for a lot of other states and areas to go ahead and preserve what our future on this planet really means. So we're happy to be here. We're happy to celebrate. We're happy as many as have delegates here today. We're able to be here. We're looking forward to the future. We'll be working with you. We're so glad we're not in Washington, D.C. steps fighting for democracy. We're fighting for democracy in Montana. We've got it. We don't have a Supreme Court justice that's out there picking fights with people with flagpoles and things like that. So we've given you a good document, and what it did, it says here, this is a good document. Now, you have the right to amend it, you can change it, you can abolish it if you want, but it's all yours, and your future is going to be on what your voters do. And it's been well developed through the law school, the EIC, and the delegates themselves. So thank you very much for this honor today. We're always excited to see the news, and the future is always with us for a clean and healthful environment, and you've certainly been a big part working for us when we achieve this and working with us as we maintain it in the future. Thank you very much.
Well, again, thank you so much. Congratulations on becoming our Conservationists of the Year for MEIC. Thank you so much for your service, both then and now. We're really lucky to have you. And that adjourns our speaking program for our day. We would love to have a group photo So we'll ask you folks to step up here for a little picture time, and then we're going to adjourn to the south lawn for lunch. We have sandwiches and salad for folks, and we'll be able to spread out and take off masks while we're outside. Wonderful. Thank you so much.